She sat alone at the edge of the dining table, the turkey untouched, candles flickering against the silence. Her children, Mark, Emily, Jacob, had promised they'd come. Promised. But once again, the seats remained empty. This wasn't just any dinner. It was her first Christmas without Richard, her husband of 40 years, a man who once whispered, "They'll always love you like I do." Eleanor Davis believed that. Believed in family, believed sacrifices mattered, until one signature, one single deceitful document, stripped her of everything: home, respect, identity. Now, at 62, abandoned and uninvited to the life she helped build, she would do something her children never expected. Not revenge, not a plea, but something far more powerful. She would rise, quietly, brilliantly, and the world would know her not as someone's forgotten mother, but as Eleanor Davis. I remember the smell of cinnamon toast filling the air as the morning sun crept through the floral curtains. That kitchen, small, modest, its linoleum floors faded from decades of foot traffic, was the heart of our home. It was where everything happened. Birthday candles were blown out there, scraped knees were bandaged, and arguments about college tuition echoed over chipped coffee mugs. It was noisy, cluttered, alive. I used to wake at 5:30 every morning, slipping out of bed without waking Richard. The smell of bacon would drift down the hall, pulling sleepy feet into the kitchen. Mark was always the first. He loved pancakes. Emily preferred oatmeal with apples. Jacob, the youngest, never said much before noon, but he always drank his chocolate milk. That kitchen had a rhythm, and I was its conductor. Being a nurse wasn't just my job, it was my identity. But when Richard's heart problems worsened, I didn't think twice. The promotion to director of nursing had been my dream since I was 35. But dreams change. Or rather, they are quietly folded and put away in a drawer when life needs you elsewhere. "I'll take care of you," I told Richard. And I did. The children were growing then. Mark applying to engineering school, Emily dreaming of law, Jacob still figuring himself out. They needed stability, and I was the glue. I worked nights when I could, took double shifts to pay for textbooks, skipped doctor visits of my own just to afford braces and tuition deposits. One night, I remember, Emily came into the kitchen while I was grading homework at the table. She must have been 8 or 9. She looked up at me with those giant green eyes and said, "You're like a superhero, Mom. You do everything." That sentence stayed with me for years. The day Richard died, it rained. Not the poetic kind of rain you see in movies, just cold, gray drizzle, the kind that makes everything ache. The house felt impossibly quiet, even with 3 grown children hovering. They came, stayed for a few days, and left. Life had to go on. I understood. What I didn't expect was the silence that followed. No more early morning messages, no surprise weekend visits, no one asking what I was cooking for Sunday dinner. The kitchen, the place that once rang with burnt toast alarms and teenage laughter, stood still. I stopped setting extra plates. I stopped checking for their favorite cereals. I stopped waiting. But I didn't stop hoping. I thought, perhaps naively, that Richard's death might bring us closer, that in our shared grief, we'd find new ways to connect. I imagined movie nights, board games, maybe even planning vacations together, things we were always too busy for. I clung to the idea that losing him would make them value what was left. Instead, they drifted. Mark buried himself in work. Emily rarely answered calls. Jacob moved cities without telling me until weeks later. The emptiness was louder than I could have imagined. I tried to stay useful. I offered to babysit, bring food, help with errands. Emily would accept, but only with disclaimers. Don't talk politics with Henry's parents. Or try not to wear that old sweater when you pick up Sophie from daycare. It felt like I was being handled, as if I'd become embarrassing, inconvenient. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of lukewarm tea, staring at a note Emily had scribbled. "Sophie can't do screens after 6 p.m. Important." It was taped next to a list of do's and don'ts, written in that crisp, corporate tone she used for work memos. I wasn't part of their inner circle anymore. It wasn't one moment that broke me. It was the accumulation of 1,000 tiny dismissals, an ignored text, a forgotten birthday, a canceled lunch, the casual, thoughtless way they talked about the past, as if I were some relic stored in it. Still, I told myself, they're just busy, that's all. And I told myself that again when Mark handed me a document one weekend. It's just for estate planning, he said. Just sign so we can make sure everything's covered. I didn't read it carefully. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I? Even then, as the fog of suspicion began to creep in, I didn't confront. I didn't accuse. I made chicken soup instead. I vacuumed the hallway. I waited in the kitchen where the walls still remembered who I had been. A few nights later, I found one of Emily's old drawings in a drawer, me wearing a cape, standing in front of our house, a giant smile drawn across my stick figure face. I held it like scripture. Mama is a superhero, it said. No one had called me that in years. Mom, have you thought about putting together a will? Mark asked one Saturday afternoon casually, as if discussing the weather. We were sitting on the porch sipping lemonade. The garden Richard once adored had become overgrown with weeds, but Mark didn't seem to notice. He scrolled through his phone as he spoke, never once looking me in the eyes. I mean, you're in good health now, he continued, but it's smart to prepare, just in case. Just in case. Something about the phrasing felt wrong. I nodded politely, swallowing my unease, but my thoughts lingered long after he left. Mark had always been the planner, the logical one, but this wasn't logic. It felt like calculation. Later that week, I opened the old file cabinet Richard kept locked in the study. It hadn't been touched since his death. The key, rusted but functional, turned with a soft click. Inside were envelopes labeled in his tidy handwriting, insurance, pension, letters, and one thick folder titled Property, Joint Ownership. I pulled it out, heart racing. Inside, I found a signed document, dated nearly 3 years before Richard's death, transferring full ownership of the house to Mark. My name wasn't on it. No joint clause, no witness signature from me. Nothing. A cold wave spread through me. My hands trembled. Had Richard done this without telling me? Had Mark known? I reread the document, then again. My mind tried to find a benign explanation. Maybe Richard had intended it to protect me somehow. Maybe it was a placeholder, never meant to be permanent. But the paper didn't lie. And neither did the sinking feeling in my chest. I placed the folder back carefully, but that night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, remembering the way Richard used to hum in his sleep, remembering how he always said, "You're the keeper of this home, Elle. No matter what happens." Had that meant nothing? I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Mark wouldn't deceive me. He was just trying to help, right? Maybe it was some financial strategy I didn't understand. But deep down, a part of me I hadn't felt in years. The nurse in me, the woman who read charts and trusted instincts, whispered that something was off. A few days later, while reorganizing the bookshelf, I knocked over a stack of Richard's notebooks. One slipped open, revealing a page filled with scribbles and diagrams. My name was there. Not just once, but several times. At the top of the page, underlined, Community Resilience. Proposal draft. I sat down on the floor, notebook in hand. It was a blueprint, a vision Richard had quietly nurtured, a holistic wellness center for seniors, offering counseling, group therapy, mindfulness programs, nutritional education. There were calculations, potential partners, even a mission statement. This is for Eleanor. She always believed in the power of restoration. My breath hitched. I turned the pages, scanning sketches of common rooms, reading lines like, provide dignity to those often forgotten, and a place where age equals wisdom, not burden. Why hadn't he told me? Or maybe he had, and I'd been too busy cooking, cleaning, managing crises to hear it. At the bottom of the notebook was a note, USB, bottom drawer locked. I scrambled to the drawer and found a small metal box. Inside was a flash drive labeled ED Project. I plugged it into my old laptop, expecting spreadsheets. What I found was a folder of letters. Richard had written to me over years. He hadn't sent them. Maybe he never intended to. But they were there. Elle, I wish I'd followed your fire more. You always saw people clearly. If something happens to me, find this and make it real. I believe in your light. Tears streamed down my cheeks. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about something deeper. What he saw in me. What he wanted for me. Not to fade into the background, not to be taken care of, but to rise, to lead. I stared at the old tea kettle in the kitchen. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. And maybe, just maybe, Richard had known this silence would come. That's why he left breadcrumbs, hoping I'd follow them out of the fog. I closed the laptop and sat back. Mark's casual suggestion about a will echoed again. But now I heard it differently. Not just as a warning about the future, but as a confirmation. The world I thought I'd built was being rewritten without me. I couldn't let that happen. Not again. The invitation had been a text message. Dinner at our place this Saturday, 6 p.m., just family, Emily. No heart emoji. No can't wait to see you. Just plain and sterile like a calendar reminder. Still, I dressed up, wore the navy blue blouse Richard always said brought out my eyes. I even curled my hair, something I hadn't done in months. As I stood in front of the mirror, I told myself this was the beginning of something better. Maybe the distance was temporary. Maybe I'd overthought everything. Their house was warm, filled with the smell of rosemary chicken and roasted potatoes. Laughter spilled from the dining room before I even walked in. But as I entered, something shifted. "Hi, Mom," Emily said, barely lifting her head from the kitchen island. "Can you take Sophie upstairs? She's getting cranky." That was it. No hug, no welcome, just an assignment. I took my granddaughter's tiny hand, her curls bouncing as she pouted. Upstairs, I read her a story, brushed her hair, waited until her breathing slowed. When I came back down, the food had already been served. There was no seat for me. I stood there for a moment, unsure if I should say something. Finally, Mark noticed. "Oh, Mom, you can grab the folding chair from the laundry room." So I did. The conversation flowed without me. They talked about Emily's in-laws, Mark's new real estate venture, Jacob's cross-country trip. When I tried to chime in, once about a place in Oregon Richard and I had visited, they nodded politely, then pivoted. "Anyway," Emily said, "Jacob, you should totally check out Portland. Their craft beer scene is insane." I looked down at my plate. I'd barely touched the chicken. After dessert, Emily pulled me aside. "Mom, thank you for watching Sophie earlier. Also, could you help on Friday? We have dinner with Henry's parents. Oh, and maybe avoid talking too much with them. They're a bit formal." I blinked. "You mean you don't want me to talk?" "Not like that. Just, don't get too deep into your usual stories. They're more corporate." Something in me cracked. That night, I sat in the guest room, the one with the squeaky twin bed and the lamp that flickered. I heard them laughing downstairs. My name wasn't mentioned once. The next morning, Sophie ran into the kitchen while I was making tea. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, smiling. She climbed onto a stool and stared at me thoughtfully. "Are you the helper?" I paused. "What do you mean?" "Mommy says you're the helper, like Maria who cleans on Wednesdays." I opened my mouth, then closed it. 1,000 answers danced on my tongue. None felt right. She meant no harm. Children never do. But the words stung. Later that day, I stood outside waiting for my ride. Mark was supposed to drop me off, but got caught up. So I called a cab. As I waited, Emily came out with a Tupperware of leftovers. "Here, so you don't have to cook tonight," she said. I nodded, accepting it with a strained smile. She hesitated. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm fine," but I wasn't. In the cab, I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past. My reflection in the glass looked tired, unfamiliar. I thought about the girl Emily used to be, the one who called me a superhero, who wrote me notes with hearts and stick figures. I thought about Mark's laugh as a boy, how he'd sneak into the kitchen for cookie dough. I thought about Jacob clinging to my leg on his first day of school. Where had those children gone? More importantly, where had I gone? That evening, I walked into my quiet house and sat at the kitchen table. The silence no longer surprised me. It was expected. I opened the Tupperware. Inside, mashed potatoes, some carrots, a sliver of chicken breast. Cold, flavorless. Leftovers from a meal I wasn't really part of. I didn't eat. Instead, I pulled out the notebook with Richard's project sketches. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and dust. His handwriting looked steadier than mine now. I traced the lines, reread the mission. A place where dignity lives, he had written. That's when it hit me. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped living with dignity. I had let myself become background noise, a default babysitter, a ghost in her own family. I looked up at the fridge where the magnet still held Emily's old drawing. Mama is a superhero. I took it down, folded it carefully, and placed it between the pages of Richard's notebook. The next morning, I stood by the window sipping lukewarm tea, the light slanting through the curtains like it had for the last 30 years. Everything in that kitchen was familiar. The creak in the third floorboard, the chipped edge of the countertop where Jacob once banged his scooter, the cabinet that stuck every winter. This wasn't just a house. It was my life's map. Something about Sophie's words haunted me, the helper. As if I no longer belonged in the family, but rather in a supporting role, part of the scenery. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and logged into the shared financial account Richard and I once managed. I hadn't checked it in months, maybe years. When Richard got sick, Mark offered to streamline everything, said it would save me time, energy. He moved our assets into a joint trust and offered to manage it on my behalf. Don't worry about the details, Mom, I've got you. Back then, I believed him. I wanted to. But today, I needed answers. As I clicked through folders, passwords, and legal documents, a knot formed in my stomach. I found the name of Mark's company listed as the sole managing entity on what used to be our joint savings account. The house, too, was no longer in Richard's or my name. It was listed as an asset under a subsidiary of Mark's investment firm. I scrolled, lips parted. How had I missed this? The legal jargon was dense, but the implications were clear. The house, the account, the retirement fund, all were tied up in business holdings I had no control over. According to the documents, Richard had granted Mark durable power of attorney in the event of incapacitation, and somehow that power had been extended permanently after Richard's passing. I reached for the phone with trembling hands and called Mark. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" "I was looking through some financial records," I said slowly. "I noticed the house is in the company's name now." There was a pause, a long one. "Oh, yeah, I meant to explain that. It's just a protective measure, legal shielding, for liability reasons." "Liability?" I echoed. "Right, it's safer this way, keeps the property from being at risk in case of any issues." "Am I at risk, Mark?" He chuckled lightly. "No, of course not. Come on, Mom, this is just technical stuff. You don't need to worry." "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked. "I didn't think it was important." That sentence hung in the air like a slap. I ended the call shortly after, offering no more than a cold goodbye. My hands were still shaking when I opened the file cabinet again. I pulled out the property insurance papers, documents Richard and I had signed years ago. They were now irrelevant. Twist 4 arrived in the form of a manila envelope I found wedged in the mail stack on the kitchen counter. I hadn't noticed it before. It was addressed to Mark, but had my home's address. I opened it. Inside, a glossy brochure from a local real estate agency. Pre-market listing, family home in prime location. The photos were unmistakable. My kitchen, my garden, the oak tree Richard planted when Emily was born. The house was being prepared for sale, and I hadn't been told. I sat down slowly, the weight of it all pressing against my ribs. That night, I waited until the house was quiet. Then I texted Mark, "Eleanor, should I be preparing to move out?" No reply. 20 minutes. Nothing. An hour. Still silence. Finally, a message arrived. "Mark, let's talk about it in person. It's complicated. That was his answer. No denial, no apology, just avoidance. I packed that night, not out of drama, not to provoke guilt, but because, for the first time, I realized this place no longer belonged to me. Not legally, not emotionally. My fingerprints were on every wall, but the walls no longer remembered me. I moved through each room like a stranger, wrapping memories in tissue paper, sliding photo frames into boxes. I found the baby blanket Emily came home in, Jacob's science fair ribbon, the apron I used to wear when baking. I packed it all. I didn't cry. At dawn, I left the keys on the kitchen counter with a note. Take care of her. She raised you, too. Then I stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind me. The cab was waiting. I looked back once. The house stood still, quiet, indifferent. The kitchen window reflected the pale sky. No laughter echoed, no footsteps, just silence. And in that silence, I knew they had crossed a line, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. The room was barely bigger than a walk-in closet, with a twin bed pushed against the wall, a second-hand dresser with peeling paint, and a small window that looked out onto an alley filled with garbage bins. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old takeout, but it was quiet. Too quiet. I'd never lived alone. Not really. I went from my parents' house to nursing school to a life with Richard that began in a one-bedroom apartment with broken blinds and big dreams. For 40 years, there was always someone, children, a husband, patients, coworkers, noise. This was new, stark, still. At first, it was a relief. No one needed me to cook, no one ignored my voice, no one gave me leftovers and silence. I set my own schedule, made my own tea, folded my own laundry. It felt almost liberating. But within days, the emptiness settled in. I found myself waking at 4:00 a.m., heart pounding, drenched in sweat. I stared at the ceiling, my mind spinning with conversations I never had. Things I should have said to Richard, to Mark, to Emily. I stopped eating properly. Toast in the morning, crackers for dinner, coffee that turned cold before I could finish. I kept checking my phone, even though I knew no one would call. Each day blurred into the next. I tried reading, but my eyes wouldn't focus. I tried walking, but every street reminded me of what I'd lost. A world where I had a name, a place. On the 7th night, I stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting my face in a harsh glow. My skin looked grayer than I remembered, my hair wirier. The woman looking back at me was someone else entirely. And then I cried. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even messy. Just a quiet stream of tears, like my body was releasing grief, molecule by molecule. The next morning, I dragged myself to the corner market to buy milk. As I passed the front desk of the boarding house, I heard someone call out, "Mrs. Davis!" I froze. No one had called me that since Richard's funeral. I turned, confused, and saw a young woman, early 30s, maybe younger, with curly black hair, glasses too big for her face, and the kind of soft smile that felt almost familiar. "It's you," she said, walking over. "Eleanor Davis. From St. Luke's Hospital, right?" I nodded slowly, still trying to place her. "I'm Nora. You were my nurse. 10 years ago, I had leukemia, stage 2. You used to sneak me little origami birds made from medicine instructions." Suddenly, it clicked. Her face had changed, matured, but the eyes were the same, wide and bright, like they couldn't contain all the hope. I laughed. A real one, the first in weeks. "You were the girl who insisted I read you Anne of Green Gables out loud?" She grinned. "Every night you had the best voice." We stood there for a moment, both stunned by the coincidence. "I run this place now," she said. "Inherited it from my aunt. I live upstairs." "You're the landlady?" I asked, incredulous. "Sort of. It's a work in progress, but when I saw your name on the ledger, I thought, no, it can't be. And then I saw you." Something inside me cracked open again, but this time, not from sadness, recognition, connection, proof that I hadn't always been invisible. "You saved my life," Nora said softly. "You made me believe I could have a future. I've always wanted to thank you." "I was just doing my job," I whispered. "No, She shook her head. You did more. You made me feel human. That afternoon, she brought tea up to my room. It wasn't fancy, just chamomile in mismatched mugs, but it tasted better than anything I'd had in days. We talked for hours about her recovery, about her rebuilding the old boarding house, about her mother who was now elderly and showing signs of dementia. She cared for her full time. Honestly, Nora said, some days I feel like I'm drowning, but then I remember what you said to me once. I raised an eyebrow. You told me, even the tired bones still hold the body up. There's strength in that. I didn't remember saying it, but it sounded like me. You have no idea how many times that sentence pulled me out of the dark, she said. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't feel quite so lost. The ache was still there, yes, but softened, like a bruise beginning to heal. Someone had remembered me, not for what I gave or what I did, but for who I was. And for the first time since leaving my house, I thought, maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something else. Nora knocked softly on my door the next morning, a shy smile playing on her lips. She held a tray with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of toast. I hope you're not allergic to peanut butter, she said. I shook my head, accepting the breakfast gratefully. She sat across from me, the tray balanced between us on the edge of the bed. We ate in silence for a few moments, the kind that doesn't feel awkward, just warm, steady. My mom's downstairs, she said finally. She used to be a school teacher. Brilliant woman, taught me everything, but now she barely remembers my name some days. I nodded, letting her words hang. She doesn't like new people, Nora added, hesitating. But I was wondering, would you ever consider sitting with her sometimes? Just be there. Maybe talk, read if she'll let you. I blinked, surprised. You want me to care for her? Nora flushed. Only if you want to. I'd pay you something, of course. It's just that I don't trust strangers. And you're not a stranger. I didn't answer right away, but something in my chest stirred. That old sense of purpose I'd buried beneath layers of disappointment and neglect. I thought it had died. Maybe it had just been sleeping. I'll try, I said quietly, but only if she doesn't throw her tea at me. Nora laughed. Deal. That afternoon, I met Mrs. Feldman, Evelyn. Her eyes were sharp but scattered, like a flickering signal on a fading radio. She didn't say much at first, only stared at my hands as I read aloud from a children's book Nora had left behind. By the end of the hour, she was humming something under her breath, a tune I half recognized but couldn't place. She did that when she liked someone, Nora whispered afterward. I started coming down every day. Some days, Evelyn called me Louise. Other times, she called me Nurse. Once, she looked right at me and said, "You've got kind hands." Each moment stitched a tiny piece back into me. The rhythm was slow, gentle. I woke in the mornings with purpose again. Brewed tea for 2, reread old nursing manuals. I even bought a small notebook and started writing. Just little thoughts, phrases, memories, something to tether myself. Then one night, while looking for a charger in my suitcase, I found Richard's old USB drive. It was tucked in a side pocket I hadn't opened since I left the house. I stared at it for a long while before plugging it into my laptop. A single folder, Quiet Bloom Project. Inside were drafts, scanned sketches, audio memos Richard had recorded, his voice warm and clear. This isn't just for Eleanor, one file began. It's because of her. She's always believed healing starts inside long before the medicine takes hold. She sees people when the world forgets them. I covered my mouth as tears welled. He hadn't just loved me, he'd seen me, even in silence, even when I was too distracted to see myself. There were layout designs for therapy rooms, wellness spaces, sensory gardens. A proposal pitch, outreach plans for elderly communities, notes scribbled with ideas like dignity-based counseling and compassion pods. And in a final document, for when the world tries to make you feel small, this center is a mirror that shows your true size. I cried then, fully, shoulders heaving, hands trembling, breath short, not from grief, from recognition. Richard had left me something, not just data on a drive, but belief. A continuation of a dream we never had time to pursue because life kept demanding other things: tuition payments, hospital visits, grocery runs, late shifts, funerals. But now there was space. For the first time, I saw that the quiet around me wasn't emptiness. It was possibility. The next morning, I brought the printed plans to Nora. She skimmed them, eyes wide. This is incredible." "It was Richard's," I said, "but it was mine too. I just forgot." She looked up. "You want to build this?" I hesitated. "Maybe not exactly like this, but something, even small. Even if it starts as one room, I want to help again, but not behind closed doors, not unseen." Nora didn't say anything for a moment, then she smiled, eyes glistening. "Let's do it," she said. A weight lifted from my shoulders, one I didn't realize I'd been carrying. The years of being overlooked, minimized, brushed aside. In that moment, I stepped forward, not back into who I was, but into who I was finally allowed to become. The dining table in my boarding room had become a war zone of notebooks, sticky notes, teacups, and highlighters. Pages from Richard's old proposal mingled with new sketches I made in pencil, some of them smudged from my restless fingertips. For the first time in years, I felt vital, not busy, not necessary to someone else's life, but essential to my own. I borrowed books from the library on trauma and aging, watched online lectures about geriatric mental health. I signed up for a weekend seminar on purpose recovery in later life, taking notes furiously like I was back in school. Nora helped by connecting me with members of the local community, retired teachers, widows, veterans, caregivers, people who knew intimately what it felt like to be invisible. I sat with them in church basements, coffee shops, park benches. I listened, asked questions, jotted down ideas in the margins of a little blue journal. "Most of us don't want help," one man told me. "We want recognition, to not be written off." That stuck with me. I refined the business plan week by week, adjusting the original scope to match the needs I kept hearing. Instead of a large wellness facility, I focused on starting small. A community room with soft lighting, daily group discussions, free counseling, volunteer therapists. A space that offered both safety and voice. Late one Thursday afternoon, I was at the print shop binding 3 copies of the newly revised proposal. I stood at the counter, rereading the title, "The Quiet Bloom, A Place for Renewal." A voice behind me said, "I know that name." I turned. It took me a moment, but I recognized him. Daniel Harrow. Once a colleague of Richard's in the hospital board, back when I was still working nights and fetching coffee for committees I was never allowed to join. Daniel had always been polite, but dismissive. He called me Mrs. Davis in that clipped tone, never once referring to me as a nurse, let alone someone worth professional attention. Now he looked older, his hair grayer, but his eyes hadn't lost their sharpness. "You're Eleanor Davis, right?" he said. I nodded cautiously. "I heard about your husband's project years ago," he continued, flipping through one of the copies I just had bound. "We all did. It was too ambitious, most of us thought, but this, he tapped the cover. "This is grounded." He paused. "Is it open for investment?" I blinked. "You want to fund it?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say I've watched a lot of people our age fade out too soon. Your idea has teeth and heart. I like that combination." It was the first time someone from Richard's world had spoken to me as an equal. Within 2 weeks, Daniel signed on as a seed donor, just enough for the lease, initial renovations, and furniture. Nora and I cried when we got the email. Then we got to work. The location we found was an old corner store with dusty shelves and peeling paint. The rent was cheap, the wiring outdated, but it had large windows and a sunbeam that hit just right at 10 a.m. We cleaned it ourselves, painted the walls soft sage green, brought in secondhand couches, added fresh flowers each week. Local artists donated paintings of wildflowers and landscapes. A neighbor built a wooden sign for the front, "The Quiet Bloom." On opening day, 3 people came, then 5 the next week. By the end of the first month, we had 20 regulars. Some brought cookies, others brought pain, all brought stories. One woman said, "I forgot what it felt like to laugh without feeling guilty." Another said, "This place saved my life." Each night, I'd lock up with Nora, the street quiet around us, our breath visible in the cold. "You built something beautiful," she told me once. "No," I said, "we did." Still, in the quiet moments, I often thought of Richard, of the faith he'd carried in me, of how he saw this version of me before I ever did. I hoped, wherever he was, he could see the quiet bloom, the laughter, the healing, the bloom. And maybe, just maybe, he'd whisper, "Told you so." The video wasn't planned. Nora had set up her phone on a small tripod during one of our Tuesday afternoon sessions, insisting that we record stories from community members for the center's online page. "Just talk about what this place means to you," she said, adjusting the frame. I sat in the soft green chair by the window, sunlight warming my shoulders. I didn't prepare a speech. I just spoke. "I used to think my life had a climax," I began. "Raising a family. Loving a man deeply, giving everything I had to a home that never asked for more. But then one day, that home didn't remember me. The family moved on, and I disappeared." I paused, not for drama, but to gather the lump in my throat. "But here," I continued, gesturing around me, "I found that it wasn't too late to bloom again. Quietly, slowly, among people who know what it means to be forgotten." I ended the clip with a quiet smile and one sentence. "This isn't a second chance. It's my first time choosing me." Nora posted the video that evening on the center's modest Facebook page. By morning, it had over 50,000 views. 2 days later, a local news outlet called. They wanted to do a profile. The nurse who helped others heal and found herself. I was hesitant, but Nora convinced me. "Let people see what's possible," she said. The article ran online first, accompanied by a photo of me standing in front of the quiet bloom, arms crossed, chin lifted, eyes bright. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, Emily sat on her living room couch scrolling through social media. Henry was in the kitchen. Sophie was drawing quietly on the rug. Emily paused mid-scroll when she saw the video. Her thumb froze. Her heart skipped. She tapped for sound. And there it was, my voice. Older, softer, but unmistakably mine. She watched the whole 3-minute clip, her face unreadable. She didn't call Henry. She didn't tell Sophie. She didn't share it. She simply closed the app, placed her phone screen down, and stared at the wall. That evening, as she tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl whispered, "Why are you sad, Mommy?" "I'm not," Emily replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "I just remembered something." Across the country, Jacob, always the wanderer, was in Seattle, sipping coffee and flipping through a local newspaper left on the cafe counter. His eyes skimmed past the headlines until one caught his attention. Elderly wellness advocate honored for community impact. He glanced at the photo, then did a double take. He leaned closer. "No way," he murmured aloud. It was me, his mother. In the photo, I was surrounded by smiling seniors, my hand resting gently on a man's shoulder as if I had known him for years. There was a quote below, "When the world forgets you, find a new one that remembers." He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his backpack. He didn't call, not right away. Instead, he wandered the streets for an hour, memories surfacing like bubbles in a shaken bottle. Me walking him to school, sewing his Halloween costume, waiting up when he missed curfew. Meanwhile, at the Quiet Bloom, I knew none of this. I went about my days tending to our little community, helping Evelyn with puzzles, welcoming newcomers with tea, organizing a local art display. I still lived in the boarding room upstairs, still made my own meals, still walked to the center every morning with a scarf around my neck and a notebook in my hand. I hadn't reached out to my children. Not because I hated them, not because I wanted revenge, but because I no longer needed their permission to exist. And for the first time in decades, I felt whole. The ripple of the video continued to spread. Emails came in from other cities. Small donations trickled into our website. Volunteers signed up. A woman from Detroit asked if she could replicate our model. A couple from Texas offered to host an event in their community center. The bloom was growing. One night, Nora and I sat outside, a soft spring breeze rustling the trees. "Did you ever think it would turn into this?" she asked. I shook my head. "I just wanted to feel real again." She smiled. "You don't just feel real. You make others believe they are too." We sat there a long time, watching the stars appear one by one. And somewhere, far away, my children stared at screens, at newspapers, at faded memories, and saw me clearly for the first time in years. But I wasn't waiting. Not anymore. Snow dusted the rooftops and curled like powdered sugar along the sidewalks. Strings of lights blinked in suburban windows, and wreaths hung heavy with ornaments and plastic berries. Christmas was coming, loud, bright, and full of cheer, and in a large colonial-style house on the east side of town, the Davis family prepared for a holiday gathering that would outdo all previous ones. Mark was in charge of the guest list, over 30 people, including extended family, co-workers, and some investors from his firm. Emily was on decorations and catering. Jacob, having flown in 2 days earlier, was assigned the music and drinks. There was a schedule. There was even a color scheme. But one thing was missing, or rather, one person. "Are you sure we have enough chairs?" Jacob asked, setting up folding seats in the living room. "We're at what, 31 people?" Emily checked her list. 30. One dropped out this morning. Jacob nodded, then frowned. "Wait, 30? Including Mom?" There was a pause. Mark glanced up from his laptop. "No." Emily kept writing, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Jacob stopped mid-step. "She's not coming?" Mark sighed. "She wasn't invited." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was pointed. "Why?" Jacob asked. Emily shrugged, her tone clipped. "It's not a big deal. She's doing her own thing now. Has her center, her group." "Yeah, but it's Christmas," Jacob said, incredulous. "She left," Mark said flatly. "She made her choice. We've moved on." Jacob stared at them. "You moved on or you erased her?" "Don't be dramatic," Emily snapped. "It's better this way." "Better for who?" he asked. They didn't answer. That night at the pre-party mixer, a smaller gathering of friends before the official family dinner, Jacob found himself leaning against the kitchen counter, a drink in hand, watching the glittering crowd laugh over charcuterie boards and cinnamon cocktails. A young man approached, someone Jacob vaguely recognized from high school. Tim or Tom, he couldn't remember. "Hey, Jacob, right?" the guy said. "Man, it's been years." Jacob nodded, shaking his hand. "Good to see you. I saw your name tagged on that fundraiser video. What your mom's doing with that community place, that's seriously amazing." Jacob blinked. "What?" "Yeah, the Quiet Bloom, right? She's Eleanor Davis, isn't she? My grandma forwarded me that video. It made me tear up, dude. She's incredible." Jacob didn't respond. The guy kept talking. "My dad says she's probably going to be nominated for some kind of civic award next year. Total legend." Jacob forced a smile. "Yeah, she's something." The moment the conversation ended, Jacob made a beeline for the hallway and pulled out his phone. He typed Eleanor Davis Quiet Bloom into the search bar and felt his chest tighten as dozens of links flooded the screen. Articles, videos, testimonials, donation drives. He tapped on one video, and there she was, his mother, calm, clear, powerful. The video ended with her saying, "It's never too late to begin again. Not for love, not for purpose, not for yourself." He stared at the screen for a long time, then marched back into the living room where Mark and Emily were laughing with cousins. "Why didn't anyone tell me she's basically famous now?" he demanded. Mark set down his drink. "She's not famous, just local buzz." Jacob held up the phone. Local buzz that's been featured in the Post and syndicated to 5 cities and used in a training seminar for elder care programs in 2 states. Emily glanced at the screen, then looked away. She wanted distance. She left. No, Jacob said, his voice rising. You pushed her out, and you didn't even invite her to Christmas. She raised us, and now she doesn't even get a folding chair at the table. She's fine, Mark muttered. Better off, honestly. Jacob's jaw tightened. You're just embarrassed because she found meaning without you, without any of us. Emily shot back. We're the ones who had to pick up the pieces when Dad died. We were the ones managing bills and hospital paperwork while she was still talking about dreams and feelings like some damn therapist. She gave up her career for us, Jacob snapped, and now she's building something from scratch while we're pretending she never existed. The room had gone quiet. All eyes were on them. Without another word, Jacob grabbed his coat. As he stepped into the snow, the crisp air slapped his cheeks. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew one thing. He needed to see her. The invitation arrived in a sleek silver envelope with embossed lettering and a corporate logo in the corner. It had the air of something formal, prestigious, just vague enough to feel impersonal. Inside was a glossy card. Harrow and Davis Development cordially invites you to the grand opening of our new headquarters. Join us in celebrating our latest success with esteemed partners, family, and friends. At the bottom, in smaller script, Guest of Honor, Eleanor Davis. I read it twice, then a third time just to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. Later that day, Mark's number flashed on my phone screen. I hesitated for a full minute before answering. Mom, he said, voice too upbeat. Did you get the invite? I did. We're really excited about the event. Big press, lots of coverage. It'd mean a lot to have you there. I paused. Why now? He chuckled nervously. Come on, Mom. You're doing great things. People are talking about you. It just makes sense. Bringing the whole family full circle. Full circle, I repeated, tasting the phrase. Does that circle include the part where I moved out of my own house with a cab and a box of memories? Mark exhaled. Look, let's not dwell on the past. This is about showing unity, growth. People love a good redemption arc. Ah, there it was. I didn't answer right away, just said, let me think about it. And then I sat down at my desk. I opened a fresh sheet of stationery, the good kind, the one with the pale blue trim that Richard used to like. I picked up a pen and began to write. Dear Mark, Emily, and Jacob, I received your invitation. Thank you for thinking of me. I won't be attending. This isn't an act of bitterness. I'm not angry. Not anymore. I've simply found a place where I belong and where my presence isn't contingent on how well it photographs. You once told me, more than once, that I didn't need money, that what I really needed was love, connection, family. You weren't entirely wrong, but it turns out love isn't always found at the table you're born into. Sometimes it grows in the cracks left behind, in silence, in kindness from strangers who become something more. So I've made a decision. I've transferred the remainder of the trust fund, what's left of the savings, the investments, the equity, into a foundation under the Quiet Bloom. It will fund mental health programs for elderly women, help them rebuild, reimagine, and remember who they are. I built something out of the ashes of what you discarded, and I plan to see it bloom for others who've been left behind. This is not punishment. This is purpose. You said I didn't need the assets. You were right. But the Quiet Bloom does. With all my heart, Mom. I sealed the envelope and mailed it the next morning. 2 days later, Mark opened it at his office. He read the letter silently while an assistant waited outside with notes for the press conference. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared out the window at the skyline he had once promised would bear his name. Emily read it in her car, tears welling before she reached the final line. She didn't call anyone that night. Jacob read it on a bench in the park, holding the paper like it might disintegrate. None of them responded. But for once, the silence wasn't one-sided. That same week, I sat in the common room of the Quiet Bloom, watching 2 women in their 70s laugh over a shared sketchbook. One of them had been afraid to speak at all a month ago. The other hadn't touched a paintbrush in years. Across the room, Nora was helping Evelyn with a crossword. Someone brought muffins. Someone else brought a donation in an envelope with a note. "I heard about you on the radio. Thank you for not giving up." I didn't need applause. I didn't need headlines. But I did need this. And I had it. Not a redemption arc. Not a comeback story. A new life. One I'd written myself. The email came from the State Wellness Committee, its header stamped with bold, formal font. Invitation to speak. Annual Mental Health Summit for Elderly Care. They were honoring community leaders across the state. They wanted me as the keynote. Me. The woman who once spent Christmas dinner alone with cold turkey and broken silence. The woman who'd been told politely and repeatedly that her time was over. Nora was thrilled. "It's your moment," she said, already planning what I'd wear, how we'd record the speech, what story to open with. But I said no, politely, quietly. I wrote the committee back and declined. Not because I was afraid, not anymore, but because my work wasn't about stages and applause. It was about eye contact across a table, the squeeze of a hand, a memory restored, even if just for one moment. Still, the committee insisted. They followed up, called, even sent a letter. "Your presence alone would mean something," they wrote. So I agreed to attend. No speech, no spotlight, just to sit and watch. The summit was held in a grand hall downtown with high ceilings and banners that fluttered like proud flags. The room buzzed with people, therapists, counselors, volunteers, journalists, everyone wearing their best faces. I sat near the back, anonymous among the crowd, wearing a soft gray suit and a scarf Richard once bought me on our anniversary. Nora came too. She held my hand under the table just like she used to grip mine in the hospital 10 years ago. The program began with statistics, data slides, formal reports. People clapped. Politicians smiled for the cameras. Then a voice over the loudspeaker said, "Our final presentation tonight is not a speech, but a story." The lights dimmed, and suddenly, my face filled the screen. A video began playing. Footage from the quiet bloom, me laughing with Evelyn, reading aloud to a group of women, sitting beside a man as he traced a drawing with trembling fingers, writing workshops, group hugs, song circles. But the most powerful images were the ones with no sound. A woman writing on a blank page, a man holding a mirror, smiling at his own reflection. A room filled with people holding journals titled, "My Memory in My Words." The audience was silent. Then the voice returned. "She didn't want the stage. She wanted the work, but we wanted to show you what healing looks like. Quiet, deliberate, and powerful." The lights rose halfway. A spotlight found me in the back. I stood up slowly. Every eye turned toward me. I didn't walk to the stage. I simply stood where I was. The room held its breath. In that silence, something happened. A woman in the front row stood up, then a man behind her, then another and another. A slow rising wave of people, one by one, standing, not clapping, not cheering, just acknowledging. It wasn't a standing ovation, it was recognition. I stood quietly, hands at my sides, heart thudding. I thought of all the times I waited to be noticed, waited for my turn, for permission. This moment wasn't about being allowed, it was about being seen. The moderator finally spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Eleanor Davis, and this is her legacy." The room erupted. Not with noise, but with warmth. Tears, smiles, humanity. Afterward, I slipped out the side door before anyone could stop me. I didn't need interviews. I didn't need flowers. I needed air. Outside, the sky was a soft purple, the last breath of twilight. I exhaled slowly, watching it rise in the cold. Nora joined me, her eyes damp. "You didn't say a word," she whispered. "I didn't have to," I replied. We stood there, just the two of us, as cars rolled by and street lamps flickered to life. Some victories don't come with medals. Some don't even come with applause. They come with stillness. And in that stillness, I had won. Inside the grand hall, the lights returned to full glow, and the hum of conversation resumed. Lower now, reverent, as though something sacred had just passed through the air. I remained by the exit, feeling the cool brass handle under my fingers. I could have walked out then, and maybe I would have, if not for the faintest shift in the crowd. I saw them before they saw me. Mark stood stiffly, flanked by Emily, his suit too polished, her lipstick too perfect. They stood in the far corner, near the press table, half obscured by a potted ficus. Neither of them moved at first, just watched the screen that now played a looping slideshow of community stories. Handwritten journals, watercolor paintings, quotes from the residents of the quiet bloom. Then, slowly, their eyes drifted toward me. Emily's fingers gripped the strap of her purse tightly. Her mouth parted slightly, as though testing the first syllables of a sentence she couldn't quite form. Mark ran a hand through his hair, an old nervous habit, and took a small step forward. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They just stood there, suspended between regret and pride, guilt and awe. Behind them, Jacob emerged, slower, more deliberate. His jacket was wrinkled, his tie askew, and there were tired lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wasn't pretending anything. He saw me. Not the figure on the screen, not the symbol in the brochure. His face crumpled just slightly, the way it used to when he scraped his knees as a child, trying not to cry but unable to stop the tears anyway. And in that moment, he did cry, not sobbing, not loudly, just one honest tear sliding down his cheek. I didn't move toward him, but I smiled, small, quiet, real. His shoulders relaxed, as if that single gesture had given him permission to let go of whatever weight he'd carried into that room. Mark glanced at Jacob, then back at me. He shifted again, clearly wanting to act, say something, do something, but no words came. And Emily, ever composed, simply looked away, blinking rapidly, lips pressed in a line. They weren't ready, and for the first time I understood. Maybe they never would be. That was okay. Healing doesn't always come as a reunion. Sometimes it comes as release. I turned back to the hallway, letting the final applause ripple behind me as I pushed the doors open. The air outside was crisp, laced with the scent of pine and faint snow. People stood in small clusters near the sidewalk, chatting, laughing, lighting cigarettes under the awning. A young reporter brushed past, phone in hand, narrating to her followers. And yes, that was the Eleanor Davis. She didn't speak, but the whole room fell silent. It was powerful. I walked past her, not rushing, not hiding, just walking. A few feet ahead, Nora waited by the car, hands tucked in her coat pockets, eyes shining beneath her glasses. "Did you see them?" she asked gently. I nodded. She didn't ask more. Together, we crossed the parking lot. My heels clicked softly against the pavement, each step measured, certain. Before I reached the passenger door, I turned around one last time. Behind the glass doors, I could still see them. Mark standing frozen, Emily head lowered, Jacob wiping his cheek. But I wasn't looking for a reaction. I was just taking inventory of what I was leaving behind and what I was finally walking toward. As I stepped into the car, the interior lights blinked on briefly, casting my reflection across the window. I didn't look like the woman who once begged for a seat at the family table. I didn't look like a mother waiting to be remembered. I looked like someone who had built her own table and filled it. The engine purred to life. Nora reached over and squeezed my hand once, then pulled away into the night. Outside, the last of the applause faded into the breeze. Inside me, it echoed. Not for the accolades, not for the recognition, but for the simple, radical truth that I had reclaimed my story, page by page, step by step. No reunions, no fury, just quiet triumph. I was never waiting to be saved. I was waiting to become.